When the day of Pentecost had come, all of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other languages as the Spirit gave them ability. The Spirit gives us dreams and visions of the realm of God on earth. And then the Spirit gives us the various abilities we need in order to move society toward the fulfillment of that vision. The problem is that things get in our way. Mainly, we get in our way. Our true self is aligned with the Spirit that created us, but we also each have an ego, or our false self. The major problems of our world are products of the human ego. The Holy Spirit is our name for the force of life in the universe. The Spirit wants sustainability, harmony, and balance. It wants a sufficiency of the things necessary for life to flourish. It wants these things for all life, not just for an elite or for one species. The ego is not always hostile to those values. It can work for them. But most of us enter adulthood with an ego that is primarily concerned with satisfying the self's desires for things like control or approval or material pleasure. The true self needs to gain mastery over the false self. And often that comes through painful withdrawal from the ego's addictions, or through the ego's whole realm falling apart, its whole world falling apart. Pentecost might not have happened if those disciples had not had their egos crushed. They had betrayed, denied, and deserted Jesus. They believed that Jesus had risen from the dead, a belief that could get them ridiculed at the very least, or thrown out of the synagogue, or even possibly crucified if they continued to do what Jesus had done. It was the end of their ego life, the end of the world as they knew it. And that is exactly when they were filled with the Holy Spirit and when they gained the new abilities that they needed. We are going through a similar process now of being humbled by our powerlessness and our complicity in creating a world that is teetering in its last days. The cracks in our ego can be what lets the light of the Spirit in to spark our truest, best core self. So what can we do to help that happen? I found a book on my mother's shelves after she died in 1988, and the title appealed to me. It was Practicing His Presence. Practicing His Presence. And you can still find this. It's still in publication. I had always been intrigued since I was a boy by the idea of praying without ceasing and living a life in constant connection to God. Part of the book was written in the 1930s by a missionary in the Philippines named Frank Laubach. It describes an experiment that he was trying of turning to God and opening to the Spirit's guidance and gifts as many minutes a day as he possibly could. He was keeping track of how many minutes he could actually be connected to the Spirit. And it's fascinating to read his account because he could be someone sitting in our Heartfulness Contemplative Training Circle, discovering the transformative power of meditation and mindfulness practice. He says things, exactly the same sorts of things that people in our circle say. Laubach was just an obscure, middle-aged missionary, and the abilities the Spirit gave him through this practice enabled him to be transformed into a best-selling author and a world-famous worker for peace through the abolition of poverty, injustice, and particularly illiteracy. Laubach writes in this book, obstacles which I once would have regarded as insurmountable are melting away like a mirage. People are becoming friendly who suspected me or neglected me. I feel like one who has had his violin out of tune with the orchestra and at last is in harmony with the universe. Each minute I meet calmly, as though it were not important. Nothing can go wrong except one thing. That is, that God may slip from my mind if I do not keep on my guard. If He is there, the universe is with me. My task is simple and clear. He writes, the most important discovery of my whole life is that one can take a little rough cabin and transform it into a palace just by flooding it with God. One of Laubach's later books was entitled Prayer, the Mightiest Force in the World. It's fascinating that at the same time, another person who was working for world peace and justice said the exact same thing. Gandhi said his greatest weapon was silent prayer. He said that when a person reduces their ego to zero, they become invincible. As Laubach said, our task is simple and clear. We need to open and surrender ourselves to the Spirit so the Spirit can give us the ability to meet these last days and find a way through them. Will it be enough, though? Will we save humanity and save the earth? Will we survive these last days? I will address these questions in the third and final teaching for today.